Welcome to Integrate Yourself. I'm your host, Allison Pelot, and you can find me at pureenergypdx.com. Today, I am here with an incredible guest. Her name is Doreya Karim, and she is going to talk to us today about biogeometry. Her father has been doing this research, I think, since the 70s, from what I've been reading. And oh my goodness, this could probably solve all our problems. It could make life so much easier. So I'm so excited to talk to you, Doria, about biogeometry today because a lot of people I feel like don't know anything about this. And what I thought was amazing about this too was that it really connects the dots as to why we built the pyramids and built all these structures that we have that were just so you know I guess, just amazed by, but also bewildered because it's like, why did they spend so much energy building these huge structures for what? What was the reason? So I feel like what your dad found out and discovered is that gap. It bridges the gap between those two things. So thank you for coming on. I'm so excited for you to share everything about what we're going to talk about today. And I've been experiencing it myself with the pendant that you sent me, and I'm loving it. And we can talk about that too and my experience with it. So, welcome to the show, Doria.
Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome.
So yeah, I definitely look forward to hearing about your experience with the pendant. And you spoke about the pyramids, and I don't know if that's where you want to start.
Well, yeah, I definitely want to get to that. But first, I just want to introduce everybody to the idea of biogeometry and that is. And if you could start also by sharing some information about who your dad is or who your father is. I don't know what you prefer to call. Um,
Sure.
and, you know, give everybody an idea of the work he's been doing for all these years and what he's been what he has discovered, which I think is incredible. We could start there.
Sure. So,
Yeah.
well, my father name, so it's Dr. Ibrahim Karim, and he is an architect, and also professor of architecture. And he worked for my grandfather was also an architect, so they had a large architectural office in the Middle East. That office was responsible for a lot of the town planning of many Middle Eastern and European cities. And so that was originally his path of work, and a little bit about the background, of where he was coming from. My grandfather also, in his later years, was very much interested in esoteric aspects of ancient Egypt. Not He wrote a few books about this, but it wasn't the traditional professional career path was that architecture office. And so we were talking about my father's book, Back to a Future for Mankind.
Yep.
And,
Here it is right here. Yeah.
and that book talks about these series of serendipitous events that brought my father to what we call the birth of biogeometry today. So biogeometry is a term he coined. Simply we can say it's the science of the energy of shapes.
Mhm.
And we refer to it as well as a design language because it has a lot of practical applications. Now, to talk about how this came about, so you can read this story in Back to the Future. I'll try to sum it up in a few quick sentences. But basically, having graduated and being back in Egypt, he was at one point they asked for my father to come in and do a renovation for a museum that had to do with ancient Egyptian medicine. And they kept it was a friend or a colleague at that time, but he couldn't take it on, but they kept requesting him specifically. And through this he was introduced to his they showed him a pendulum, or what we call a scepter from ancient Egypt. And having come from Europe, he was familiar with the concept of pendulums, or I would say detecting types of energies in the earth. You can those with a little bit of a background or maybe you've even seen it on TV. There's this concept where you'll see somebody walking around with, like a stick
The
looking for
dowsing.
water. Yes, the
Yeah.
water dowser. So that's the most familiar image, but you would also see some people kind of using pendulums as well. So he knew of this, but he wasn't very much drawn to it at the time.
Hmm.
But his friend said, looking at ancient Egypt, I mean, like I said, there was already a reverence or kind of a respect for ancient Egypt. That's why I mentioned my grandfather as well. But he told them, if we look there, they approached what we call the science of radiesthesia scientifically. There was a purpose to these shapes.
Mm.
So his friend told him, when you go to France, um, you're gonna go to this store. I forget the name off the top of my head, but something like translates to House of Radiesthesia or Maison de la Radiesthésie, probably, and ask for these set of books on what they call French radiesthesia or microvibrational physics.
Yeah.
And so at that time, he wasn't even planning on going to France. A week later, he gets something from work saying, "Hey, you're heading to France." Um, when he went there, he didn't go straight to the store. And then, 3 days later, he walked in, he asked for these books. They said, we don't carry these books. A lot of this, this information of approaching what we would call vibrational radiesthesia in this way is, it's not popular or widely available. So he said, a woman actually overheard him and she said, "Are you the Egyptian?"
Oh, wow.
He said, we've been waiting for you
Yeah.
for 3 days. And here you go. Here is a lot of this research um, that discussed many different things. It was, we call it French radiesthesia, they called it microvibrational physics. It had to do with, it, at that time, what was popular was really, if you think about the radio engineering and coming out and applying this type of thought principle to something like dowsing,
Mm.
which was a weight on a string, and looking at different types, applying things like wavelengths to this concept and seeing, can we tune the body to different vibrations?
Mm. Yeah.
And so, she said this was, here's all of these texts. And there was, when they studied shapes, there was shapes that were beneficial and shapes that were harmful. And there was, for a lot of different reasons, that science didn't become as popular. But she told him, "Here are the books, and we know it's an Egyptian who's going to be reviving the science." And so he then took it back to Egypt, where he started looking through this research. Now, the other serendipitous part, in my opinion, too, is just whose hands it fell into, because he was,
Yeah.
when he approached this, while we talk a lot about the science of biogeometry, even places like the pyramids, for example, and other what we call power spots, these places are known as being places of healing.
Mm-hmm.
So already there was a little bit of an aspect there. If you look at the shape of a pyramid, a lot of people use it for meditation. A lot of people use
Right.
it, for, if there's people out there listening who do orgone devices, crystals, and pyramid shapes. So there
A
was
lot of people consider it hippie, but there is a science to it, right?
yeah. And so, I can, off track, but I can tell you for sure. I mean, one of the things when he started teaching biogeometry, this was, I don't know, we had a few years ago an event where we had the celebration of 45 years of biogeometry being taught. And when he started teaching, I think the word energy and all of the stuff was like non-existent in our society.
Yeah, right.
And then when I think of, when we go out today, it's my whole family is involved. So that's why when me or my sister, my brother go out teaching or speaking to people, this idea of energy now is there and it's coming out. And um, whether it used to be that, maybe you hadn't heard of it at all. There's
Right.
some of these concepts now, yeah. So almost everybody's heard of it. Not many. Some people don't buy into it. So
Right. That's true.
so we can say that. Um, but yeah, so going back to him, I mean, one of the things that was great was his background in that he wasn't a doctor. So I think what that allowed him to do is to come up with an approach that is very different in terms of working with the body and working with the environment than a doctor would. And
Yes.
and that was basically what gave us biogeometry, but
Eh,
background of master planning. um, what he what he focused on right away was these power spots.
right,
You know,
right.
there was these areas from which, if we look at history, there was important spots to all of history, and these came about even before certain religious or spiritual beliefs. It was the spot itself. And when we look at how they would find these spots, it would even be through things like migratory patterns
Mm,
or
that makes
how,
sense.
yeah, migratory patterns. How one of the things they would look at is the freshness of meat from animals there. They would look at the rate of fermentation. So all of these different things of observation, um, and then we get these sites that basically we call sacred sites or power spots or places of power. People have different words for them.
Hmm.
Uh, and when we look at them, the reason they're interesting for us now when we talk about energy is they're locations where if you look at them, a lot of people have an experience that leads to healing, wellness, emotional well-being. And this happens regardless of what you're diagnosed with.
Yes, I believe that. Yeah.
So that was important as an architect because it meant if I could unlock the secrets of these sites that have what we call a centering quality,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
then I can have something that I can provide to people through architecture, through a design language that would create centering environments that are beyond polarity, we say, beyond dosage, which goes beyond our modern approach to healing the body, which is very much polarity and dosage oriented.
Yes. Makes it much easier to heal, I think. It's an interesting thing because I remember reading about harmonics and the science of harmonics and how we've all well many of us have experienced a sound healing session, but we can't really always explain how that works. But you always feel much more aligned and balanced. Or I've also experienced in a sound healing session parts of my body that are restricted, and then it's a little pain or a little density in those areas as the sound moves through. So there is this huge aspect that we're not addressing in the medical industry, of sound, color, which is what your father writes about in the book, which is amazing. Kind of, he really does connect the dots, and so in my opinion, this is so important because um we're trying this, we're trying this, looking at it from a very separate mindset of everything's, this is here, when it's in reality, it's all working together, and we could make it so much easier on ourselves if we looked at it that way. Healing could be way more pleasurable, in my opinion,
I
than it
mean,
is now.
yeah, to go, I mean, I guess to be a little bit more towards using the terminology or the approach that we normally use, it's not so much that we say that in biogeometry we're looking to heal the body. I mean, we see that as one of the components of sacred power spots, but what we actually say we're doing is, what does the sacred power spot actually show us? It
Yeah.
shows us what the experience that we can have in a centered environment.
Mm. Yeah.
And so what we talk about a lot is actually looking at what we call the qualitative energy exchange with the environment. And in a way, I mean, if those who might have some kind of energy background, or you mentioned sound healing or different things like that, even when we're looking at that approach, I mean, the thing is, even and this is something that might be important as well for a lot of anybody who's doing energy work out there, because sometimes even even in sound healing, you have to make sure now to be able to what we call now that centering quality. You still have to go to a practitioner who would know the right fork to use.
Right. Yeah.
Same thing for color healing. You need to have somebody who knows which color to pick out. So what we try to actually approach it from is if we can bring in or place the body in that centering energy of a sacred power spot, in a way the body will start to enter a state of, it will start taking care of itself.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. And that's what I felt when I wore this. It just seemed to be very subtle, but I noticed just things were working out better, Not that things weren't working out, but I noticed that there was much more of a flow and ease to my life when just because I feel like it did balance out and align that subtle energy body. And I put the stickers around the house as well, and felt the difference. So that's what I have experienced exactly what you're talking about. It is and I feel like if to experience that, you do have to um be healthy, because it will and correct me if I'm wrong, but do the power spots in a way amplify whatever's going on in your body, or in your reality? Is that how it works too?
No, so uh, it's not an amplification. We call it actually. So the reason that we use the term centering instead of balancing,
Centering. Okay. Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
and what's the what's the difference between the centering versus the balancing is from the general approach. You can even think of them as if I was trying to balance your body,
Mhm.
then what I would the approach that I would be doing is I need to find out what's out of balance in order to achieve a state of balance. Now, the problem with doing that is that you're playing this game of trying to keep the scale steady, and then on top of that, it's a difficult approach because while I'm trying to figure out what's going on in your body is responding to the environment. So
Mm.
it's a changing energy system. Now, the centering approach is a little bit different in the sense of if you look in sacred power spots, and we go back to sacred power spots, there is the birth of biogeometry was actually being able to detect the quality of a sacred power spot. And so once you're able to detect it, you find that there's actually that quality exists within our system. So those who are familiar with something like the chakra system,
Mhm.
uh, biogeometry is a science of shape, and it doesn't have, I would say, a chakra system. But when we looked at the shape of the human body, the shape of the human body itself, every shape has these centers, and the shape of the human body has these centers that happen to fall exactly where the chakras normally in most systems are set to be.
Wow.
And so what happens is the idea now that when we can connect back to the centering quality, or what we actually say is try to have the centering quality amplified to fill the entire system. Now, it makes sense that the only way we can do that is also in our interactions with the environment. But once we're able to achieve that, then the body can start to balance itself. So our goal isn't actually, when we're working, our goal isn't necessarily you know, um, to achieve a state of balance. It's to activate the centering quality in the environment so that a natural state of balance is achieved.
Yeah, I love that. Because you're working with the earth's energies then to harmonize with it. It sounds like what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we work with the Earth's energies. I mean, you mentioned sound, color, or I might have mentioned color. And it's the same thing. Going through, the book Back to a Future for Mankind, there's a chapter there where we talk about the physics of quality.
Mhm.
And what we look at is when we look at a color, there's a quantitative side to the color, the frequency, and then there's a vibrational quality to it. The
Mhm.
vibrational quality is the color that we see. So we say that, you have quantity and quality are two sides of the same coin. But when you start looking, basically for us, what's the definition of energy is the ability to produce an effect. And when I say the word quality, I mean the effect that you experience.
Hmm.
Once you start being able to measure energy qualities and understand the energy of shape, then we can start to shape environments so that we are changing the quality of everything that's affecting us. So this is where we get, for example, to the work of biogeometry, where there's been regional solutions to help with the effects of things such as electromagnetic fields. But I would say environmental stressors as a whole. We try not to focus on one thing. We try to look at the body's interaction with the environment as a whole.
Yeah, and he used the term, you guys use the term electro-smog and how that's affecting our bodies. And I love, I do really love the idea and the approach, because in a way it's not, it doesn't feel like there's nothing we can do. We have to get rid of technology. What you guys are saying is that we can work with it and improve the quality, like you're saying, of energy that we're experiencing, with using different shapes, like you talk about in the book. You have he has another book, Biogeometry Signatures, and it talks about what the shapes mean, and so interesting, and how each shape relates to a body part as well, or an organ as well. That's, I thought that was amazing. How does that relate to the architecture and the buildings we build, and as well, like the structures of the past with the pyramids and all of that, and the megalithic structures and everything?
So when we look at the pyramid shape, I mean, we spoke about the pyramid shape, so maybe we can start
Yeah.
there. But the pyramid shape itself, if we look at that shape, we say that that shape is an energy emitter. Okay, so it's known to amplify. Um, and a lot of times when people meditate under it, it's because they're 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 aware that when they enter the pyramid sometimes, or some people are sensitive, some aren't, but they can feel a rush of energy. Now, the main thing I would say that was missed. So for anybody there that's interested in shape, in the energy of shape and pyramids, I would say take, if you don't get the book Back to the Future, at least take some time to look up the because most people are replicating the shape of the Great Pyramid without being aware that the base is actually eight-sided. And
Oh,
so there's certain photos from angles that can show these slight indentations. And that's actually a very important aspect of the shape that needs to be replicated whenever you're reproducing it. So that's just a tidbit there. But the main thing is, if we look at the pyramids as it's a shape emitter, so the big question is, what is it amplifying?
mm-hmm.
And when we understand what it's amplifying, then we can look at the history, where we look at things like megalithic stones, and we see how the ancients would interact with the sacred sites. So one of the first examples is they would get these menhirs, so these huge megalithic stones that generally had a high quartz content, and they would use it to mark. And they could be getting these for miles, from miles away, huge
Wow.
distance. They would be carrying them to mark these sacred sites and amplify that energy. Now, if we look at that megalithic stone, you can see it from megalithic stone to things like like multiple stone structures, even related to, the earth and sky. So probably the most familiar one would be Stonehenge,
Right.
um, as an example. And then we see other different kinds of interactions. So we see, once we start getting into this concept of energy qualities, we move from just the regular menhir to something like the obelisk in Egypt. So in the obelisk, we actually find the concept of height. So mathematical proportions are coming in, and you would have, so other than material, you'd have also specific height to create a wavelength
Mm-hmm.
that reproduces that desired energy quality.
Oh,
So,
wow.
so one researcher who's mentioned in the book, Dr. Constantine Mail, he actually studied how temples dedicated to the same god had the same wavelength. So the length of that temple would be the same. Now it's a little bit different in biogeometry. We would look at both the length and the height. So then we get to, from the obelisk, you can actually see that sacred architecture continuing into church towers and mosque minarets.
Right.
So you do see this evolution, even if it's not exactly, you could, I mean, it's today somebody could come and put a stone with a high quartz content on a power spot. We still do that, but we do see this evolution of how there was an interaction with them. And then with the pyramids, we see what's called a dolmen structure. And a dolmen is like a gate structure
Hmm.
that was usually placed in the east-west direction. So again, east-west, you can think of that cycle, that sun rising, setting, related
Yeah.
to that whole solar cycle, life and death cycle. And this gate, so traditionally you might find things such as an eastern gate or a dolmen structure that was then covered by a hill, taken to the next level in the Sahara pyramid. Then finally we see another level where you have the Great Pyramid with the King's Chamber being that dolmen. So you see this different culmination of an interaction with power spots.
Right. Yeah. So it's it progressively, what I think I hear you saying is that it's progressively getting a little more refined each time. You're saying each time they do
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
I mean,
Okay.
you can say that, or different components or ways of interacting,
Oh,
um,
right. I see. Okay.
with these Earth energy sites. But I mean, it's important to us today because uh, one of the other things that we look at is, I mean, it's a lot of times what's not discussed. I mean, we for many times, if we look at that, we have our brain and it's a filter
Hmm.
of the five senses, and that's how we're experiencing the world. A lot of times what we don't realize is we also have a time that we're born in, and that's
Yeah.
how we're experiencing the world. And so there's a
Yeah.
shift discussed in Back to a Future for Mankind, that shift from a holistic right brain perception to the left brain perception. And then now we see that door to the right brain opening again, that right brain perception, that holistic worldview. We're trying to move a little bit from, and I would say we're from the biogeometry perspective, we can't say we're trying to move from the quantitative and the mechanical to the qualitative. We're actually trying to, we see that so much progress has happened here, but we're trying to open the doorway so that we're
Uh,
bringing in that centering energy quality into all of our products of modern technology, because that's a knowledge that we used to work with.
yeah. Sounds like that's what's missing.
Yes, I mean, it's
Yeah.
definitely our opinion that's uh, that's missing. I mean, it's once we get into just this concept of qualitative energy exchange, you apply it in everything. You apply it in, how can I bring the centering principle even into what the definition that we actually give. I mean, I've been using this term, maybe spirituality or spiritual belief for centering energy quality. The definition that we give to spirituality is excellence of action. So
Yeah.
there there's different aspects that we do. There's some things that we need to wear, or shapes we add, like you mentioned, because there's some things that we're bringing in, products of modern technology, that we find are depleting our life force a little bit. And so with those, we have to come in and add a solution. But excellence of action happens in our daily life, in our approach to everything that we're doing. And so
Rituals and what we're practicing most of the time and focusing on is that what you're saying? Yeah.
rituals, I mean, rituals are important because through the science of through looking at it from an energy perspective, we don't want to lose rituals.
Yeah.
Every A lot of locations have rituals that we might take for granted, and we can measure the effects of those rituals. But even approaching excellence of action in everything that you're doing, whether it's waking up, making your cup of coffee, whether it's your workout, your just that approach is important to bring into daily life, because when we talk about energy as the ability to produce an effect, that includes your emotional and mental energy exchange with the environment and yourself. And so we look at that from a scale of, it's there's obviously things that you're bringing into each situation, and then there's things that, because we no longer from an energy perspective, let's say you kind of bleed into the environment. So if there's a lot of environmental stress,
Mm.
then that's going to affect your emotional and mental state, whether or not you're aware of it.
That makes a lot of sense to me because
Yeah.
I can tell a big difference when I'm in New York as opposed to Portland, Oregon, or Oregon itself, just being more in nature. Uh, yeah, it's all the extra, noise and electromagnetic stress, and a lot more people living very close together. Um, yeah, it can feel a huge difference with that. Yeah, I just couldn't even. Took me so long to get to sleep there when I was visiting one time. Oh, not about a year ago, I guess. And yeah, and some of it can be subtle. Some of it I feel like people can get used to over time and not be so aware of it, right? But yes, it does affect our health and our well-being, and it does affect what you're saying and really being your best. And it brings me back to the book, The Four Agreements, and he talks about one of the agreements is to do your best. And we can't do our best if we're not at our best, or of course you can do your best if that's your best, but not better than that if the quality is poor, right? So
So
that
what, yeah.
helps.
And I'll say what biogeometry brings to the table is that there's a part of that, there's a part of you that you can think of as your environmental self.
Yeah.
Uh, or we don't, there's a part of you that's completely, I mean, it's when we go into the ego and the full, the part of you that's actually, you know, all there, all part of that environment. Now, that part of your environmental self, what we're trying to do is bring that quality of that information exchange to be as centered as possible so that it's supporting your environment. And so by bringing it in, we say that we're opening this doorway. And this is what the ancients did. If we look at ancient Egypt, um, a lot of times when people approach ancient Egypt, they think that ancient Egypt was a polytheistic religion. But from the biogeometry perspective, we look at it a little bit differently. And what we see is that the ancient Egyptians they weren't looking at what we call the netters. That was actually the names of the gods. And if you see it, netter is the root for the word nature. It's
Mm.
that these were nature powers. And so we actually look at them as a set of abstract vibrational laws that help govern our body. So when we look at it, there's an actual level, archetypal level of blueprint upon which we're built that we need to stay connected to in order to grow in this centered manner in the environment that we're in, or in order to interact. And that's what we're trying to bring in
Yeah.
when we work with biogeometry into environments. So the ancients knew how to do this because we see that in how the importance that the power spot played in their environments is that it brought this centering quality, which has a lot of different things. I mean, when we look at the towns where we worked in Switzerland, a big part of bringing in the centering, when we went in Switzerland, there's two towns, Hamburg and Hirschberg. And when there was a cell tower installed, people started complaining of a lot of health problems.
Oh, right.
And my father's friend knew of his work. I mean, he had gone to ETH in Zurich, and uh, my father's friend knew of his work. And he asked him if he can come and approach it from a biogeometry perspective and provide a solution. Now, when he went there, he realized, they had an independent study that was done, but within the study, the health effects that people were complaining about were not just related to, there was headaches, insomnia,
Mm.
but then it moved a little bit from the physical to mental health effects, tension, fighting more with people, even things like saying the will to live wasn't there anymore.
Mm.
And that became a huge part of the study because it doesn't matter if it's just the tower. I'm not saying that the tower is the problem here. You can say that the tower was the tipping point, because when we look at the environment, there's a whole set of things that we look at. And then also there was a huge issue with the cows. So the cows are having a lot more stillbirths. There was an issue, of course, then with the dairy industry there. There was an ecological upset. I mean, one of the things that after applying biogeometry, the first thing that the residents noticed is, hey, the bats are back.
Oh, wow.
So there was we from biogeometry we began to see this aspect, and this is where I was talking about that emotional and mental centering that you need your environment to support you in, because by applying biogeometry and removing that environmental stress, those emotional and mental symptoms that the residents were complaining of went away.
That's incredible.
And so we see now that importance, and we're bringing it more and more into a lot of these different aspects, where we're even studying the shape of a classroom and developing the ideal shape of a classroom to help support children with autism and ADHD and
Wow.
ADD. And looking at that now, once we start doing this research, that ideal classroom is not just for the child who is said to have autism or ADD. We actually find that it's the same set of shapes that are stressful to all of us or help relieve the stress from all of us. It just, the effect might show a little bit easier on those who are more sensitive to shape
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I wondered to myself, like, how do we lose this knowledge? You know, because it seems so valuable. And it feels like we could solve so many issues and problems, right, with one thing. um yeah, I remember looking at the biogeometry signatures, and seeing there was actually one for even food intolerance. There's a signature for that, right? A shape. And what would the shape be like? I mean, that might be hard to describe, but for a classroom, like, maybe could you describe what that would look like for harmonious classroom?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm just curious about that. Yeah.
let me see if I can even just show it to you. But
Okay.
looking, I mean, looking at let me just pull it up here. Looking at food intolerance and different things like that. I mean, it might be worth it while I'm pulling this up now to just explain what the biosignatures are. So one of the things that the biosignatures are is looking, if anybody's familiar with the meridian system or acupuncture.
Hmm.
So you have in Chinese medicine an approach where you have the meridians. They're lines that run across the body, and then you have points on these meridians that are acupuncture points. Now, this is just to give an example. It's not exactly the same thing, but to give some people an example that maybe they can relate to. So when we start measuring what we call qualities, so like I said, tuning the body to be sensitive to just one specific quality, so that you can think of tuning, an energy quality could be something like you mentioned, sound healing could be something like the energy quality of dough, but just making the body very sensitive to that specific quality, or the energy quality of the color red.
Hmm.
So you can actually start tracing when you start looking at them as specific qualities. You can trace energy lines that are moving through the body, very similar to the meridians.
Oh,
But
yeah.
just like we spoke about the chakras being related to the shape of the human body, it's actually the same when we look at meridian lines. And you see that, you'll see that they run along the shape of the body. So biosignatures was actually taking it a little bit deeper and looking at, so each organ has multiple functions. Are there energy lines that we can find within the organs? And then finding those energy lines in the body within each organ, mapping it out. And
Wow.
if you want to say activating it so it has the centering quality, or basically trying to create this window, because we don't have the perfect human body.
Yeah.
So we try to bring in that centering quality so that we've gone beyond any physical person that we're seeing. And if you think of it, I mean, we look at the development of the human body as being based on this blueprint, and this tension with the physical environment creates a little bit of a difference
Hmm.
between each person and that blueprint, which actually gives us this feeling of beauty, gives us this differentiation when we look at each other. And so if we can find those patterns and bring the centering quality into them, now the idea is we talk about something related. We talk about this concept of the resonance of shape, where two similar shapes will have a resonance. Um, Most people, if I say resonance of shape, I'll lose them. But if we go back to maybe a piano and we understand with, if we look at sound as a vibrational quality, which it is, we look at a piano where you go and you have, your do, 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 and that's what we call resonance.
Mm-hmm.
So we can actually, there's an approach that we call the interchangeability of scales now, and we can look at, there's nothing that's not moving, there's nothing not that's not a motion. So what the biosignatures pendant is it actually has those shapes that naturally exist in the body, those energy flows, and they're open-ended linear diagrams. And think of it that in your body there's an energy flow that's moving like that, like a
Mm-hmm.
circle. When I put the same energy flow next to it, think of it that they start to move together.
Oh, yeah.
And so, some people like to picture in their head a computer chip, with energy. Um, it's actually, we were part of a hepatitis C study in Egypt. And it was a three-part study because at that time, hepatitis C was, it was one of the major health concerns. So they actually took on a national comparative study. They invited Biogeometry to be a part of it, and it was divided into three parts. So in part one, Biogeometry was the highest. It scored a 90% in
Wow.
normalizing enzymes. Um, and then there was those out of about 300 people, those who could afford it, I believe it was 80 or 90, tested for viral clearance, of which more than two-thirds had complete viral clearance. The study was
Wow.
shut down after, even though people tried to come in with funding. But at that time, the pendant, that was before the pendant, there was no pendant sold. Uh,
Okay.
that's actually how it came to be a biogeometry product. Um,
Oh.
it was actually on a little, it was a rectangle, on like a little rectangle thing that they called a chip. So the first one was called the biogeometry chip. You had all the signatures, and then they looked like circuits. And then
Wow.
when the head of the medical department, the dean of the university, went out and talked about the study, that's when people came and there was interest now for the pendant. So
That's cool.
I have here, oh, I can't show you my screen. I was
Yeah,
going to
I can
show
let you
you.
do that. Let me
Yeah,
see.
it might
Got
be
the
nice to just show you the
ability
picture.
to do that. Okay, now I think you can do it.
Yeah, it might be easier than me explaining. So
Yeah.
there's one article that I saw online and it has
Oh,
some.
wow.
So you can see this was the model
Oh,
they
wow.
were
Oh my gosh.
working on. This was developed with the Autistic Society, and then I'm just going through the article here.
Yeah, yeah.
You could see this was where
Oh,
they're working
wow.
on developing these centers in Egypt and the whole. And then here you can see some of the different shapes. So you can see the shape that it's built upon. And then what we did in our office is, because we had to start developing a prototype to test. So in our office, we built one of the classrooms, and it's open to, there was some sessions there, um, where, the Autistic Society would come and they did some of their sessions there, but it's also open to anybody to come experience.
Yeah.
And so it's,
It sounds like it'd be a great way to, teach all the kids together, because usually they will separate the autistic kids or kids with learning disabilities, in within the classroom. But that would be, I think, ideal if the kids could be in the same environment, get, equally benefit from that.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
I mean, there's,
amazing.
of course, a lot to the approach with, it would be sidetracked, but even to the approach with autism, I mean, the only term my father will use for autistic children is psych kids. But most
Side
people,
kids, is that what you said?
yeah, but most people aren't aware of that term. It was actually because a long time ago, one of the researchers that actually one of the students did, and it was in a center for, they called it a Psy Kids Children's Center. But
Oh,
basically, it's because they would look at the extra abilities that children with autism would develop, and some of them were psychic. But it's just not a common term. But
oh,
it's the
interesting. I
term.
haven't heard that. And so they have they're more sensitive, and that's why they say that, because they're just more sensitive to energy, that people
Well, also,
subtle
yeah,
energy.
they say that
Yeah.
they have more psychic abilities. I mean, part of my you would see that part of my, I mean, part of my sessions when I was actually in university, I was working with children with autism. That's how I'd spend my summers volunteering, and I would be helping to do their sessions. And there was, if you focused a lot, I mean, obviously, just going through the school curriculum and things, we would do that. But because I was a volunteer, I would also get to spend a lot of free time with them. And if you paid attention, you could also see that they did have abilities that, that I would say maybe the mainstream kids didn't have. So there was
Right.
always, and so you'd focus on, so that's why the psy kids, because they could have these psychic abilities or extra artistic or creative abilities. Uh,
Wow.
and so, and the interesting thing that came out of that was that student who had that center that was called Psy Kids, or did what we refer to it as the Psy Kids research or experimenting. She showed all the biosignatures to the children there, and every single child diagnosed with, whether it's autism or ADD or ADHD, picked out the same set of biosignatures
Oh my gosh.
to help center their energy system. And
That's
so
incredible.
she would give it to them with a piece of paper and they would pick it out. And so you was, um,
That says a lot
yeah,
right there.
it
Yeah.
was, it was pretty
Oh
cool.
my goodness, that's very cool. Wow, this could change. This could be a game changer for the educational system, big time. We need that in the United States so badly. And with everything going online now, where my son's been on online school,
Yeah.
it's just like not the same. So hard to get used to. Um, So, oh my, I love everything that we have talked about. This is incredible. Like I feel like so many this information. I'm honored that I'm able to get this information out to my audience, and I hope that it continues to, expand and get out there as much as possible, because I think this is so important. And it just would make our life so much easier. We talk about, this futuristic kind of society of everything being easy and working with nature. And this is how I think we would do it, kind of is that missing component. Um, let's see. I feel like we've touched upon just about everything that I wanted to talk about today. Let me just see if there's anything. Well, you know what? That's actually leads into, how can biogeometry solve our environmental crisis? The global warming aspect and climate change and all these things. What are your thoughts on that, Doria?
I mean, one of the things we talk about, and you'll find it mentioned in Back to a Future for Mankind, is the fact that electromagnetic radiation as well, how it could be related uh, to the climate change crisis. Because if we look at how do you heat things in a microwave, you heat it through electromagnetic waves. So we are
Right.
adding all of these electromagnetic waves in the environment, completely unchecked increase. And so, is there a connection there between that as well as the, temperature changes that we are seeing? So global warming and different things
Oh,
like that.
yeah.
Now, it's as far as what it means to us, I mean, or the biggest goal for biogeometry is we actually use the term humanizing modern technology. And when we start to look at what it means to have a science of shape, I mean, there's the whole, if we talk about that we create our environment. So yeah, electromagnetism, sorry, electromagnetic devices, electricity is all a part of that. But also, just here having this mug right here, this is a part of that too. And so when we look at a design
Yeah.
language of shape and we look at shape as energy, there's no reason why I couldn't design this so that it is enhancing my interaction, or basically my interaction with it, or every interaction that I have with different products and different things is strengthening to my energy system, is bringing that center and quality to my energy system. And I think that's what biogeometry brings to the table is, just like in balancing the body, it's or centering the body versus balancing the body, you don't have an approach anywhere where I can say, I'll make you better and it doesn't matter what you have. Or,
Right.
maybe that's not the exact way to put it, but it's, let me start by making you better and then we can look for the issues. That's in a way what centering the environment brings to the table. When we
Yeah.
look at increasing that centering quality in any place, and you can do it from, whether you're doing it from master planning or architecture or adding shapes in the home, like what you've mentioned. And what happens is when you bring in that quality, the reason we call it a centering quality is because of the effect that it has. You start to correct your environment, to take stress off the body, and you don't even have to sit and first focus on the problems. And I think that's a huge thing
Mm.
as well from
Yes.
that worldview, is that if you're able to actually start centering issues without always being in the mode of, this is the issue, this is what's causing me
Yeah.
harm, because that's what we've gone to today. We've
Yes.
gone to, it's just so easy to be, you know, scared of everything. You know, if you're trying to find your path to nutrition today, good luck. It's probably you're gonna get there,
Yeah.
but it probably is gonna take you, lots of sifting through, listening to different people until you find, what works for you. Same thing with, if you're getting to that perfect you know, whatever it is to support your system, workout, it's there's a
Yeah.
lot of information out there.
A lot. Yeah. Do you think that the people are used to things being complicated? They're not used to things being more simple and easy? Or
Um,
what's the deal with that? Why do we always gravitate? Is it just because there's so much information out there that we feel like we have to kind of get through? Or actually, what it sounds like to me is the centering quality is not there. So we're not sure like where to start in the first place, right?
I mean, I think there's a lot of different things. I think in, you know, not from a biogeometry perspective, we're just bombarded with all of these different resources of information, and maybe we weren't, a lot of us went to school where it wasn't this much information, so part of our curriculum wasn't developed to how to sift through all of this information, assimilate it, find the proper resources, if how to read studies, if you're interested in making your own decisions, all of these different things. I hope they're part of the educational curriculum today. Um,
Yeah.
now, and then a lot of it is our left brain perception that we need to talk about. We see things as separated. We see the body as separate. We don't see the body as a whole. And so that's, it's very difficult if you start looking at the body from an energy perspective. It's difficult to isolate one problem. One thing could be the most pronounced. But if you look at it as a whole system, once there starts to be one issue, you can see it in the whole system. It's the same thing in the environment. The environment isn't a piece. And so that's what we're also trying to do in terms of our approach to the environment or approach to the body. Let me find this problem, and solve it. But it doesn't create a sustainable approach, especially from the subtle energy perspective, where your body is always in constant energy
Yeah.
exchange. And so it's a little bit, I guess, maybe of being able to open up a little bit to some the wisdom of the environment and our connection to the environment. And so that's where we talk about, again, this qualitative energy exchange with the environment and environmental energies.
Yeah. I think that is where we start. Because otherwise we're just running around like chickens with our head cut off, right? Trying to figure out what's going on. And wasting a whole lot of energy in the meantime, right? When we
Yeah.
could just be, a lot centering, as you say, and sifting through what matters and what doesn't. And I think that's we tend to. I see people focusing on a lot of things that don't matter as much or aren't gonna, like you said, these little separate pieces because I do believe also that we are too much in our left brain a lot of times. And like your father talked about, I heard him talking to Paul Check in the interview that he did with him about how, and I think I heard you say this too at the beginning of our interview about how we are entering into a phase of stepping in more to the right brain and centering the left and right, uh, because you need, we need qualities of both, right? But we haven't been using the right as much, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
it's a different there's a TED talk that I always found interesting. It's called A Stroke of Insight. And I'm the exact details. So it's, I believe she's a neuroscientist.
Hmm.
And then what happens is she has a stroke, and you can see that perception switching from the left brain to the right brain perception. It's important. It's important because it talks a lot. I think it would answer a lot of the questions that we spoke about today, where um, what happened when that door to the right brain closed? Why is it important? Why is it important to our health and our future? Again, it's because we talk about this concept of absolute reality, the reality that we live in, this huge vibrational soup, versus the perceived reality. And we're trying to control the absolute through the perceived.
Mm.
But there was a shift where we understand. I mean, you mentioned sound healing, for example. So people now are coming back and thinking of a sound as a vibration and how it can resonate with the body. And but if we look at now in ancient times, you would see that that came first.
Hmm.
The,
Right.
the, the effect of the sound came before language. The energy quality of the number, right, whether we're looking at one stone or two stones, for example, actually came before the development of using the number for practical purposes. Now, what happened is
Right.
that practical purposes is what grew, is what our society is based on. The other part was a little bit that's lost. That's why I was talking about as well, looking at the lens of. So, one of the things that we try to say is also for those who are looking at studying ancient sites or studying ancient rituals, is we have to be careful with the lens that we're looking through. Because if you're looking through today's left brain perception lens, you might miss the bigger picture.
Mm.
And
Yes.
so a lot of times, it's we're looking at, and what biogeometry is trying to say is the reason that we try to work so much with or one of the ways that we work with these energy principles of shape is that you also have a lot of traditions and rituals that approach the environment, but because we've lost the key to how do we work with these principles, we can't actually use those rituals or traditions to solve issues related to our environments with modern technology. So that's one of the reasons you actually find us
I
focusing a
see.
lot on modern technology, because you might have traditions that have been passed along for creating these positive environments. Whether some people might be using specific proportions or specific traditions coming from a country, placement systems.
Yeah.
But if you understand the principles behind them, then you should be able to adapt them to this era, to our scientific problems today.
That's incredible. I absolutely love that. Well, oh my God, this has been an incredible interview. Doria, thank you so much for sharing this. And I
Thank
hope
you
to
so
have
much
you
for
on
having
again at some point in the future to expand on what we talked about today after I read these two books or
me.
finish reading them. It's just like I'm so excited about this. It's like I feel like a kid in a candy store reading these books right now. So thank you so much again for coming on, and please leave my audience with some of the best ways to your offerings, of course. I know that you guys have some classes and great products that I've been using. We didn't really talk about the charging pad and the clearing pad, but those have been incredible too. I've been putting things on both, and maybe you can just give everybody a little idea of what those are, whatever you want to share about your offerings and how to find you.
I mean, if they go to the website, biogeometry.com, that's probably the best place to start, because you can see the shop, you can see some of the products, you can actually read a bit about biogeometry. You can also go and look at our calendar for classes. If you read the books and you want to get more into the practical work, um, Also, one really great resource is YouTube. So on the BioGeometry YouTube page, there's a lot of different types of products we have. Dependent, what one of our, for the body, when we come to biosignatures, we have two things, either what we recommend for people. You can see I'm wearing a ring here with all of these different shapes.
Oh,
It's like
yeah.
a pendant. I also have the pendant on.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. Yeah. What is the difference? I had actually forgot to ask this question earlier. I have the other pendant too, but what is, so obviously this has a lot more shapes on it right here. This one does. But the other one that you have on just is one shape. And is
this
there,
is one
what
shape.
is, yeah.
So this shape is what we call the L90, and it's actually based on, if we come in and we look at the centering principle, one of the shapes that we talk about is where do we find the energy of that quality that we call BG3, or the centering principle. If you take a circle,
Hmm.
you can actually detect it in the middle of the circle. That's relevant because there is actually no middle of the circle. If you just point
Right.
to that middle of the circle, I can keep expanding it and expanding it. So this shape, the L90, actually has to do with channeling the energy, that centering energy found in a circle. There's a lot of, we talk about different design principles, but basically you'll see that you have a quarter circle here with lines being channeled out. And so we have these in different angles, all that have a different type of effect. And so we say that this produces the centering quality on the emotional level.
Oh, wow.
It's there on the pendant as well, but what happens is you mentioned the clearing tray. So anytime you're wearing any, and this, by the way, is anybody who wears crystals or any jewelry on your body,
Hmm.
there's a level of energy exchange that we need to clear. Now, you can do that just by, for the ring or the pendant. I can just like blow on it a little, tap it, wash it. The most common thing that will affect it is things like dust.
Okay.
Um, But we also have a clearing tray that comes with it that you would just place the pendant on once a day to help clear it. Now, the reason that we recommend having the L on there is it needs a lot less clearing.
Oh,
So
okay.
it just adds that extra support, because for some people, if their pendant needs clearing, they can feel it, they can start feeling a little bit heavy. So having that on there helps.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it can be used for anything. Some people I know that have the clearing tray, they most often used it for glasses. So they'll have glasses, they'll put it
Oh,
on there.
that's a good idea. Yeah.
People are using it with crystals, anything that really needs clearing. And then we have another tray. I actually have it here. Mine's probably a little dirty, so this is.
Yeah, I have that one too. Is that the charging tray?
That's what we call the charging tray. This was
Yeah.
actually the shape that had the first biogeometry patent.
Oh, okay.
And the angle is designed so that you would place anything here in the center, and you can actually begin to charge it. So you could just use it. I have it here. That's what
I
I
put
have.
water on there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a cup of water or something.
Yeah. So I would just, don't put it straight touching here, just the part that.
Oh, okay. Just
Here.
that part. Okay.
Yeah. I
Gotcha.
mean, just make sure you can put it straight touching, but you would want it right in the middle of
Okay.
the tray. And then those really interested to dive in, if they go even into that, we have a biogeometry Facebook group. They'll see a lot of different people who actually did this shape, and it looks quite simple, but you can see a lot of these different things in agriculture as well.
Oh, okay.
That it was used a lot in agriculture. There was 3 years my father spent at a parasite research center in Holland, and this shape was used a lot in agriculture, and you can see it as well on the group, and you can see a lot of people talking about the effects that they're seeing.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. Yeah, and so yeah, some of the what is it? Oh gosh, the name is escaping me. Biodynamic farming. I'm sure they use some stuff too, as far as I feel like there's also some similarities. And we didn't really get into the sun moon stuff, but that's also the art of how they use that as well. But we could save that for another time. Yeah. There's so much to talk about. Thank you, Doria. This was incredible. Thank you for spending the time with me today and talking about biogeometry.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure.